Welcome, everyone. We are so excited for the event today, Women in Data Science. Hi, everyone. My name is Oana Buto, and I'm the co-lead for the Women in Tech pillar of Women in Action Central Texas. Amy.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Amy Kroger. I am a pillar support with Women in Action, and we're really glad to welcome everyone today.
Yes, and for those of you joining us for the first time at a Women in Tech event, welcome. We host events once or twice every quarter, and we cover a range of technical topics for our audience. We also volunteer opportunities, so for those looking to mentor others in the tech sphere or be coaches at a coding boot camp, we also have opportunities for participation in things like this speaker series on data science, engineering, those kinds of workshops, and more.
And if you are interested in learning more about our events, please feel free to add yourself to the Women in Technology Pillar Teams channel, or keep an eye out for our events, which are sent to all subscribers of Women in Action Central Texas. Now we are excited to introduce Elizabeth Lamb from Breaking the Glass, who helped organize this Women in Data Science panel discussion and will tell us more about the panel today. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Amy. But yeah, so like Amy said, before we get started, I'd just like to say thank you to, the Dell Women in Technology Pillar for inviting us in. This is our second time doing a program for y'all. It's been such a joy every single time. And, special thanks to Alana. This might be even our third event together. We've been connected in the Women in Tech space for a while now, and it's always been such a pleasure to work on so many great projects with you. I'm very excited for this conversation. It's been a really special one to put on, with a lot of back and forth and carving out really to find a really great topic to have a discussion on. So I'm very excited about it. But yeah, just a moment to introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Lamb, the Partnerships Manager for Breaking the Glass. We partner with tech companies and nonprofits to provide free, personalized programming on diversity and inclusion and women's career development topics. We've provided webinars and events for our partners in the past, like Walmart, IBM, and Charter Communications. Let me know if you'd like to learn more about getting involved. If you want to speak on any of those topics that I just talked on, women's career development, diversity, inclusion, a certain technology, we're always looking for great speakers to get involved. So I'll be dropping my contact information in the chat as well. The session will include a Q&A portion towards the last 15 minutes. So I do encourage you all, in order to help out our moderator, please type all your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom. That'll help get our questions organized and answered. And don't be afraid to type in a question before we get to the session. The earlier you get your question in, the best we can answer it. But yeah, so in a second, I'll be going off video and on mute so that I can focus on providing some resources for y'all. In the chat, I'll also be sending out a survey. If y'all could take that, that would be fantastic. We always want to know how we're doing, and so that we can improve our programming along the way. I'll also be dropping our speakers' LinkedIn links so that you can get connected with them and continue the conversation as well. So now, without taking up any more of your time, I'm going to pass our session over to our amazing moderator, Susan Meer.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to everyone who included me in on this session. I'm really excited to be a part of it. But just to kind of give a quick introduction, so I'm actually a senior recruiter within the business intelligence and data analytics space for my company, Computer Futures. So we do a lot of staffing within the tech space, and my market specifically, as I just said, is basically anything and everything within the data lifecycle. So I am actually very excited to be a part of this, because I think it is something that I involve myself in every single day when talking with candidates and clients. And also, I guess, I also am very involved within the Breaking the Glass community, and this is just another way to continue to get involved. So thank you again for inviting me and letting me be a part of it. And without further ado, I'd love to start introducing our speakers for the event today. So I thought I'd go ahead and just start off with Rebecca. If you'd like to go ahead and kind of give a quick intro, and then we can go down the line with the other speakers.
Sure, thank you, Susan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name is Rebecca Bilbrow. I'm the co-founder and CTO of a startup called Rotational Labs. I'm actually a veteran of many startups and have survived. But I've also worked at several very large organizations. So I think I have a general sense of what it's like to be working in kind of the data space in a very large organization. I have worked in a lot of different types of industries and verticals. So all the way from sort of public sector type stuff, government work, to media and entertainment. The company that I've founded now is in the cloud computing and distributed systems space. And so my role is to apply machine learning and data to create more optimal environments to build applications and run them in the cloud, and to store data sensibly in the cloud. I do a lot of API development, and one of my sort of favorite things that I've done is something that some people in the audience may have heard of if you have experimented with Python machine learning. You might know about the open source Python library Yellowbrick. Yellowbrick is a package that I created with my partner Benjamin Bengfort about 5 years ago, and it is a public, open source Python library that is designed to make it easier to navigate the machine learning workflow by integrating plotting routines so that you can see what's happening when you are building your machine learning models. I'm also a faculty member, an adjunct faculty member at Georgetown University's Data Science Certificate Program. And I'm the co-author of an O'Reilly textbook called Applied Text Analysis with Python. So I've done a lot of natural language processing in addition to visual applications. Excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be able to hear a lot more about everything that you've been able to contribute to as we continue with the questions. But on to our next speaker, Alyssa.
Oh, that's tough to follow up. I did not develop my own Python library. I, as someone who uses libraries, that is just impressive. I've never developed one myself, but I do use a lot of them. My name is Alyssa, and I work for Affinity, which is an applied artificial intelligence company where we build predictive models that help route calls in call centers. I work in our data science and data analytics team. So I'm responsible for building the entire data ecosystem where the predictive models are built off of, and then building the predictive models to be put into our client's environment to control the call routing space. I would say that it's definitely a very intensive experience, because it starts from data engineering to building the data ecosystem, to data analytics to understand all the data that's coming in, to data science, right, to actually use the different machine learning techniques to get the models run into production to control the call routing. So we're very excited. We've been growing rapidly, and I look forward to speaking on this panel.
Thank you, Alyssa. That sounds very interesting just as much. So thank you for letting us know a little bit more about you. And lastly, Anna.
Hi, my name is Anna Patrick. I'm currently an insights engineer at Charter Communications. And what that basically entails is when you're on a web page and you're interacting with it, I am working on creating the events that capture your activity and your behavior. on that webpage, and then reporting on them. So I predominantly am working right now with some internal tools like Kibana. We use AWS and SQL for reporting, and Tableau. This is my first role in the telecommunications space. Previously, I worked a lot in healthcare as both a business and data analyst. So I would largely, through my progression, my different roles, I think I've largely served often as a liaison. So between either the front end people who implement like I'm doing right now, and the design team, so when they're actually designing how the layout of the page is going to look. But in other roles, that can be up to like C-suite or training on the tool that we use and we're implementing. We want other people to adopt it and adapt it in their workflow. So I really enjoy the roles that kind of connect people together around our technologies and around data. So inviting more people into that circle that they feel empowered talking and working with data.
Thank you. I think that's definitely a great goal to have and something to be passionate about during your career. So I guess to kind of start off the questions, the first one is mainly just, like what about the data space in general kind of piqued your curiosity to pursue a career in this field? So I guess, Anna, if you'd like to start, I know you kind of just talked a little bit about like what makes you really excited in your career, but I guess where did that begin?
I think at its core, it was working very closely with technology and innovation, and also with people. And I think what's kept me going and excited is, as I've experienced, but also what we are witnessing right now with our panel, is there's so many different types of roles and there's so many different types of people. And there's a lot of things you can do. So I think that variety and diversity there keeps it interesting and helps me stay curious and motivated. So I think at the core, it was really, I love technology and I like that side of it, but I also really like working with people. And I found in each one of my roles, there's a lot of really great people in this space. So that speaks a lot to also maintaining myself in this space, because I've always felt like there's enough people around to motivate and encourage and teach, because there's a lot of complex things that we are using or trying to understand. So having the right people in that space that want to bring you in and teach you. And I've found in every role, I've found someone like that.
Nice. Rebecca or Alyssa, do you guys have anything that you'd like to add? I guess that was similar or even different when you guys were starting out your careers?
I can add something. I think if in terms of career, you always want to be in a space that is expanding, right? And I believe that data is where computer science was 20 years ago, right? You want to get in while the tide is going up. And I believe if you look at year over year data jobs, mentions of data anywhere, it's just growing exponentially. And I anticipate that it's going to grow exponentially for the next, decade at least. So I think you want to be in a field where there's constant innovation, constant growth, and constant idea sharing, because it's like a high trajectory space that will keep you interested as an intellectual.
I know, it kind of makes you think about what the next 20 years is going to look like. I guess with that said, I mean, this can kind of open up the discussion a little bit more, but what are some steps that you all feel like you're taking to further develop your careers in data? And Rebecca, I mean, if you have anything to add, that'd be great. Or, I mean, honestly, anyone open to answering.
Sure. So I've been kind of in the data space for a while, although, I think as Alyssa suggested, the space is expanding and changing. And so it's changed a lot since I started doing data science work. Maybe 10 years ago is, I think, when we started calling ourselves data scientists. And before that, the term didn't really exist. I guess we called ourselves analysts or statisticians or, some sort of miscellaneous term. I think that I have maybe kind of two things that I think worked for me well, that I would suggest. The first one is to kind of very carefully balance between credentialing as a data scientist or credentialing as a data professional and actually doing projects in the data space, or doing real data projects. And that could be really anything. It could be just in the office, in the job that you're in, kind of taking a data science approach to some project that's starting or that's ongoing. But to be very cautious about balancing between credentialing and actually doing the do. I think that, maybe anecdotally, a lot of the women that I mentor feel especially like they need to credential as a data professional in order to be taken seriously or recognized. And, by virtue of the fact that we're in a new field, that's growing, like Alyssa said, and that's sort of very constantly changing, like Anna said, credentialing is fine, but sometimes it's even better to be able to point to a few projects and talk about some projects that you've done, and use those. So I think that'd be one piece of, advice that has worked for me. And then I think the second one is to record your journey. One of the pieces of advice that I got at the beginning of my journey, or towards the beginning of my journey, was to keep a development journal that would be essentially writing journal entries or blog posts to myself to record the things that I was learning. And each post could be just a very short thing. It could include code, or it could just include some terminology that I'd learned, but to record that journey. And you would be amazed how often I go back and look at posts that I wrote years and years ago. I think that it's been a very valuable thing for me to record my journey as I develop myself, as I've sort of grown as a data professional.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting. I feel like that's something that could be really beneficial to be able to like look back on and just compare to what's going on now. And I know you talked about obviously wanting, like, you love being a liaison and being like that individual for both like technical and non-technical. So I guess what steps do you find could be helpful with that when developing your career?
Yeah, I'd echo some of what Rebecca said, where there are a lot of online tools that lead to certificates and, credentialing that are amazing, but there comes a stage where you have to do that step back and implement and put to practice the theories and the little projects that you used there through that process in your own workflow, so that you really get your voice around what you just learned. And then also start to see the other ways that the theories you just learned could be applied. And then kind of piggybacking off of that, I think it would be find people both in your place of work and outside of it, that you can speak candidly about what you're working on and where it's landing in some level or in some realm. So again, you can practice articulating what you do, what you're learning, what you're seeing, and then you're also getting some outside perspectives and hearing their questions and how they receive your explanation. And that just also helps you further develop your understanding, your voice in the space. But I would say predominantly the things that have really helped me in the last couple of years in my career have really been from a place of like being and who I am, and also things I do outside of the office. And so on that first point, I think ultimately I've really tried to practice what it looks like to be curious and to be courageous and to be detailed. And I think those three things have really helped me, like guide me through this space and guide me through the different roles and being able to, I think, authentically interact with people. And so showing up that way has really helped me in my career, being ultimately curious at the core of it, but then having the courage to speak up about those curiosities, and then being detailed, knowing like that was probably something I was always kind of naturally geared towards, and I'm just trying to foster that strength. But I would also say I started working with a coach, a life coach, in the past 3 years. And again, going back to my first point, that has really helped me in how I show up at work. Having someone that I meet with regularly that I can talk through things and can help foster, again, who I'm being as I show up has really helped me be a strong individual in this space. So I know that can look like a variety of different things. It doesn't have to be a life coach, but ultimately it's someone who's removed, who has your best interests in mind and is also equipped with like skills and credentials to help you develop. And that has really helped me in my career.
You're adding your own personal touch to basically the data that you're working with, the people you're working with. I guess you were bringing up a little bit about just like the theories that come with like working with data and just in general, like everyone being kind of consumed with it. So then, leading into the next question, like what are some of the common misconceptions around data? I thought, Alyssa, you could start out with this if you'd like, and maybe just go on. I mean, obviously this is a very broad topic, but it definitely, I think, is a very important one as well.
Sure. The sexy part of data science is like 10% of the work. The rest of it is just like a total disaster while you try to clean the data. So you will, I know like, you're like, oh, I'm a cool data scientist. I'm going to use like machine learning algorithms. I'm going to use like this neural network, or I don't like XGBoost, whatever. Like, yeah, that will take up 10% of the time. The other 90% of the time is like, where did all this data come from? Is it complete? How am I going to string them together? Are there duplicates in this data? Like, are they sequential correctly? Like, how do I check over and over again that like I got the right data, I interpreted the right data, I did not screw up like what I'm trying to actually work on? And all of that requires a significant amount of time from a significant number of people because of how disparate data is, right? Because right now we're in a growing stage. There's like not like a standard, right? Like one company will use different terminology versus another terminology. They will use different databases. There will be different structuring of data, how to collapse them all into the same structure so you can actually build something on top of is probably like 80 or 90% of our work. Like the other 10% is like this sexy part that everyone like keeps on talking about. But then there's like this whole section where you're like, wait a minute, I spent all this time thinking I'm going to do something really great, but I'm spending the entire time like checking like how many rows there are and is it like correct, and like did I interpret everything properly, and was like, are there like issues in the data format itself? So that's probably what most people don't realize when they go into like this field, that the sexy part is this much and the rest of it is just very, very meticulous work around getting the data in a shape that you can use.
It only makes you stronger though. What about Rebecca or Anna? What do you guys think?
I would say one is that you need like a large amount of data in order to do anything meaningful or create an insight. And so I think it's important to simply start simply, and you can work with a small set of data and really understand that, and then build a model off of that, build a visualization off of that, build something off of that, and then work on capturing more data from that. So I think there's this sometimes this misconception of you need a large amount, you've got to collect everything, and then you can start to create something meaningful, or then you can start to build something. And I think we have to gear towards just start somewhere, have a clear what are you trying to answer, a clear understanding of what you're trying to get out of it, look at that small set of data, and then build off of that.
That makes sense.
And that will also help you from like kind of double dipping, where you are waiting to collect all this and then using as you start to build and work with it, then you're changing your starting point and your original purpose and intent, because the data starts to tell you, you start to get pulled by the data rather than you've got a set in theory and instruction and intention, and then just finding the data that aligns with that. So it's can help against that, I guess, as well.
No, that's super interesting. I feel like that kind of goes into like what your goal in mind is when you're working with data.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in general, I feel like as an average, just like user for different, you know, websites and everything, I think a lot of people can tell that it can be overwhelming to think about like protecting like data that you're working with and your own personal data when, you know, you're on a website and you're accepting into something and you don't exactly know where it's going, but that's how any average, you know, user on the internet might feel. So I guess, what are some, like for you all who, you know, you are kind of behind the scenes seeing that, like what are some simple everyday actions that you would suggest that consumers can take to protect their data? And Rebecca, if you want to start, that'd be great.
I think that, you know, we're in kind of an interesting era. I think that this phrase, you know, data is the new currency or data is the new oil, you know, that phrase has been around for a few years now. And it's an exciting phrase because, you know, it sort of suggests that there was this untapped resource that we didn't know about. And maybe we imagined that that data that was the currency was old data, and that we were using that old data now in new ways to do something miraculous. But the reality is that a lot of the data that is this currency is live data, you know, data that's being created right now while we're on this, you know, call, you know, by IoT devices, or, you know, I'm wearing a Fitbit, right? So this is collecting data from me right now, and it's for my benefit. But, you know, sort of, I think when you think about what this, you know, what that data is, that's currency, it's us, right? You know, our data is the currency. And in some ways that might be alarming, or scary to think, you know, we're being monetized. But the truth is that we get a lot of value usually in exchange, right? So we use a lot of free applications, right? So if you close your eyes and you think about all of the things you use today that were free, you know, social media apps, email apps, I suspect that everybody who is on this call with me has used at least, you know, 3 or 4 things that were totally free to you today. And the truth is they're not exactly free, right? Because, you know, by using them, you are giving permission to that company or those application developers to leverage your usage data, presumably to improve your experience and maybe other people's experience on that application. So I think that we just want to think about that trade-off, right? So if it's a context where the data that you're sharing with an application is not giving you a very good user experience, like maybe you shouldn't give them your data anymore, right? So if you're not really using an app, or you kind of think it's not great, it's not giving you a lot of value, don't give them your currency of your data, you know, kind of pick and choose. And, you know, there might be cases where you elect not to use an app because you prefer not to give away some of your data for it to be used. And probably you're getting, you know, messages all the time, like cookie banners that are popping up on, you know, the websites that you visit that ask if they have permission to track what you're doing on the website, and keep track of you know, the information that you visit and that you enter into that website. So just, you know, maybe think about that a little bit, but honestly, the very best thing you can do to kind of be more deeply engaged in how your data gets used in these apps is to become a data scientist. And I'm not joking. That's really the best way to understand how data scientists are leveraging this data on the back end, and it will help you build a mental model of how your data is being used, or likely how it is being used, and how it's unlikely to be used. So I think that would be my advice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. I think too, I was going to say, like, to proceed with some level of awareness of the context, which I think, going into the space of data science would certainly help you build that context. But I think, some things that I do, and by no means am I perfect at doing this, but it's really like asking myself, like, okay, well, who's doing the tracking? Who's doing the counting? And is in that, like, whose interests are being served from what I know, from what I can quickly research, and who's at risk from this capturing, from this tracking. And just those kind of three questions sometimes help me with how I navigate and what I navigate to and where I spend my time. So I made a decision to leave social media a little over a year ago, and it's probably going back to one of our earlier questions for, what's helped you develop your career. That's probably been one of the best decisions I've made, because it's really helped me with where am I spending my time. But also then, there's a lot less stuff that I have to, not that I'm worried about anything that I do, but I think I really navigated and they're like, I don't really care, I'll just give it away. But still, if I don't know who's doing the tracking, if I can't answer what are they doing with it and are my interests being served, then ultimately down the line in the future, it could create something that's not helpful or productive for maybe not me just as an individual, but for society. But one example I gave recently was there's a lot of those, you can use your Google or your Facebook to sign on to other applications that are completely not related to Google or Facebook. I think Pinterest is another common one. And ultimately, that's you on that app, which is totally unrelated, giving permission to them. So now Facebook or whichever one, login, or Google or Pinterest that you chose, has access to that information. So I think it's those subtle ways that they're getting around being able to get a lot more data about you. So just being aware of those type of tactics as well, I think is helpful. And having these type of conversations, so like other people can tell you stuff that you may not know.
That kind of leads into my next question, just because, as a non-data person myself, there are things where I feel like I could probably learn a lot more about, and it is something where you need individuals who can probably help, break down those technical building blocks to individuals that aren't as technical. So I guess, how can non-data people work on their data literacy? I know that it is a passion of yours to work with different types of groups. So if you have any suggestions on that, I know you were talking about a little bit earlier, all ears, but I know obviously.
Yeah, I think some of it too is our language and the way we speak about ourselves. So I think letting go of this, I'm a data person, I'm a technical person, I'm not a data person, I'm not a technical person. I think that's the first step, is just not looking at yourself in that way or not perpetuating that. And we need to let that narrative go, because where we need to be is having a lot more people comfortable with data, comfortable reading it, interpreting it, communicating about it, working with it. And that's really leading to this, one of the trends really is about giving more data to more people that aren't just technical roles. So people who are in technical roles can certainly help with that process, but ultimately companies can as well, with what their strategy is around distributing data and the tools that allow people to access it, and having some clear strategy and infrastructure for that. But really, it's those everyday conversations that we're having with each other, where we're taking that extra second to make sure they're understanding something or teaching something new. And it's going to be those tiny little steps that we do to create a culture internally that then start to expand. So I think it's ultimately breaking down this narrative that we have that there are certain people that can or are able to work with data, and they don't need a degree for it. And that with this more collaborative relationships between people who may have those advanced degrees and people who don't, I think will really help bridge this gap that we have around data literacy.
That is a good point. Rebecca or Alyssa, like, what do you guys think?
I think everybody has worked with data. I mean, if you ever worked in finance, you worked with data, right? If you ever worked in accounting, you worked with data. If you ever worked in payroll or HR, you worked with data, right? Like, I don't believe there's a single person here that's like not worked with data before. Like I just don't believe that in any way, shape, or form. Like everybody has worked with, like if you have a job that requires a computer, you have worked with data.
There's data.
Right?
Yep, I agree.
I understand that if you're like a professional, like, I don't know, like bicyclist, maybe like you have not worked with data, but you probably did because you're probably reading the stats of all your competitors, right? So like legitimately, like everyone has like worked with data. I think everyone should just have the mentality that you know how to work with data. It's the data people just know a little bit more than you do. And but you have just as much potential as anyone else because everyone has worked on it. So it's just about, are you interested to focus a little bit more on it?
I think that I honestly never really thought about it that way. And it is true. I feel like some people, maybe it's more of a mindset too. It's like, how do you view it? And how do you like, then like I guess when someone asks you a question, like some people are more analytically more focused that way, but rather than others. But that is maybe more of just a preference thing. So, Rebecca, do you have any, I guess, input, or you just agree with both of them?
Somebody asked this question in the Q&A about, what are the different roles on a data science team? And maybe that's a good way to think of it, is like, there's a lot of different roles on the data science team, right? So there's a role for somebody who's a really strong programmer, because you got to have somebody who can write it in code. There's a role for somebody who's kind of mathematically minded, maybe somebody who understands the business, right? So are we trying to reduce cost? Are we trying to reduce waste? Like, what's actually gonna make people like this thing that we make? There's room for data domain experts. So even, if you don't know very much about kind of modeling or even coding yet, if you're a data domain expert, you're incredibly valuable because you can interpret what the data mean. Like, what all the columns, like those acronyms, you're the person that I'm going to ask to explain all of that stuff to me, because I don't know the domain. Usually I know the methodologies, and the techniques and the models, but I don't know the data domain. So there's a lot of different roles to play. And maybe it's sort of just a matter of figuring out where you fit.
Yeah.
On the team.
That is definitely a good point as well. Well, I guess this kind of leads into our last question before we head into Q&A. But I mean, honestly, just like, what are the most exciting things going on right now in the data world? It's so interesting to think, as Alyssa, you mentioned at the very beginning, kind of like what it used to look like even 20 years ago, and to even think what could happen the next 20 years. We have a very empowering or powerful and involving world ahead of us. So I guess, what do you all think is really cool right now?
I'll just start. I think what's really cool right now is like the focus on data, because to actually do data well, like you need a huge infrastructure, whether it's from like the amount of compute you're gonna have to buy as a company, like all of that infrastructure build out. It's not like, oh, I built a little something on my computer. It's like, woohoo. No, like you actually wanna put it across a company as large as Charter, like they have to spend like millions of dollars just getting the infrastructure up, right? And that requires like leadership to say, okay, this is worth me investing this much money out of my budget to go do, right? And I think that is probably the most exciting part, right? Because previously it's always, oh, I'm Walmart, I'm a retail company, and I just need some database to make sure I track all my like shipments and like accounting, so like everything is cool, and like I get audited, it's kosher. I think more and more Walmart's thinking, wait a minute, like I need to become like this digital company that just happens to sell stuff to people, right? I know Capital One says they're not a bank, they just happen to be a technology company who their purpose is banking, right? And I think it's that shift that is really exciting, because then unfortunately you need money to get this done, right? And if companies are not investing in it, the field is not growing and there won't be as many opportunities. But I think it's as these traditional companies begins to shift their mindset and invest in data that it becomes very exciting for me, right?
What about?
Yeah, I'd say like the democratization of data, getting more data into a wider variety of people's hands. Internally, we have this like self-service type of mentality. So there's a number of tools that they can go and access and start building their own reports. So that's like Pivot and Kibana and Prism, and then they can start asking questions. And then to what Rebecca said earlier, once it gets to a certain level and they need a bit more expertise, they've already done some initial investigation, some initial thought process. What am I trying to answer? What do I need? So that when it gets to that certain next level of more complexity or just other tools they don't have access to, they call on someone like myself or other data scientists, and we help. And then we also receive a lot more information at that starting point, a lot more of the requirements behind what they're looking for, because they've had some time to look into the data themselves and ask some questions and really understand what it is that they're looking for. So getting in certain ways the data out to people in a structured manner through tools, so that everyone can work a bit more collaboratively. And then I can also get insight more on the front line, more onto like whether that's the creation of a tool or how the tool ends up being used by a user. That will only help me do my role better as well.
Rebecca, what do you think?
I think that the last 5 years or so of machine learning have been relentlessly focused on building massive data sets and massive models. So extremely complex neural, deep learning model architectures. That's what is getting published now. That's what is sort of has academia excited. Massive data sets, just kind of unfathomable size data sets. And that's been the trend for the last, 5 years, maybe a little bit longer. I think that there is a change that's coming. And I'm actually going to be talking about this at another event. O'Reilly is putting on like a free super stream event later this month called Scaling AI. So I'm going to be speaking about this a little bit, but I actually think that, the future is small models that do very kind of focused things. So it's not about necessarily kind of amassing trillions of data points or learning how to build the most complex deep learning architecture possible, but it's about defining a very specific problem that will fix a very specific thing for a specific group of people, and kind of finding that data set that helps you build that model and doing that. So I think that that maybe the future is small things, small models maybe. So that's what I'm excited about.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate everything you guys have shared thus far. I find that this conversation has been very engaging. We do have a lot of questions just, in the Q&A. So a lot of them are actually around, how you all got to where you are. And, I think just to start off, one question that I thought was really interesting is just like, did you guys, when you were, figuring out how to get to where you are now, did you find like training to be helpful, like getting a bachelor's degree in something in particular, or do you find like getting a master's is really important? So I guess what was each of your experiences with that?
Well, I'll jump in here and say I do have a PhD. It is not in machine learning. It's not in data science. The PhD is something that's vestigial, right? I did it, when I was young, and I found data science after I finished graduate school. So for me, I had a family. I had to support a family. I had to make money. I had to have a job. So I had to make choices about credentialing, degrees and professionalization as a data person, while I was also trying to support a family and have health insurance and pay the rent and all of that. So for me, I did a semester-long certificate program that was partly reimbursed by the organization that I was part of, right? So I made a commitment to my organization to stay with them and help them with whatever I learned from this program. And I took this program and I kind of brought back those learnings to my organization, and that helped. But really, like I said, I would try to balance credentialing, like getting degrees or boot camps and all of those things, with actually just doing projects. So look around you, find interesting projects that are close to you, that are close to your organization, that matter, that would help somebody, in your organization. Try to define it as a data science problem. Think about how you would solve it. What type of machine learning problem is it? Where would the data come from? Just kind of thinking about those things that are close to home. I think that that's maybe even more valuable than going to school. And be careful that there's a lot of like very predatory boot camps out there that are not great and are expensive, and that's way more true now than it was 5 or 10 years ago. So be a skeptical shopper.
I know someone just asked what credentialing was, so I appreciate you kind of going a little bit more in depth about that. And also it could be helpful, we don't have to do it now, but if you guys have any advice on like maybe like what boot camps to do versus not, or like what you've heard of. I think a lot of people, even as a recruiter, when I'm talking with people, I know they're always telling me what boot camps are doing, and I always think it's good to kind of hear from the direct source which ones are worthwhile and which ones aren't. But Alyssa or Anna, like what did you, I guess, obviously like work experience and projects, I think those are really important, but I guess like did you guys go down the route of getting degrees and training within the analytics space?
I would say so. My background's in engineering, and then I got a master's more in teaching some business and finance principles for engineers. That was also part of my university that I went to. So my kind of analytics has been through my roles, and then the tools that I've had to adopt in doing those roles. But I've certainly dabbled in Coursera and the free online stuff myself. I would say those are great for, keeping yourself curious and dabbling. And then to what we've said before, like you learn a little bit here, and then you can see how maybe you could apply it in your current role. But yeah, I think trying to figure out, and I've done this before too, working with your organization. Oftentimes they have relationships already built in with certain companies to offer really good rates on certain credentials. So seeing what's offered there and just being your own advocate. So figuring, if you really want something, figuring out a way to present it. So there's a demonstrated benefit or something that they'll receive and what you'll also receive. So just mapping that out and going for it. and because you really have nothing to lose by investigating and asking for something like that.
Yeah, I did no credentialing of any kind. My degree is actually in like finance. I would say that the data field needs so many people that they just want someone with potential, right?
Mhm.
Like, I feel like if I need to teach you how to use SQL, I can. Like, if I need to teach you how to use Python, I should be able to do it in the next 3 to 6 months. But I do need someone who is intelligent and bright and is capable of critical thinking. And I think that's how I got into my role, because I did no credentialing. And basically, I think that what they saw was someone that had enough to learn the raw skills on the job. And I think you should not be afraid of that, right? If this is what you want to do, you can do online courses. They're much cheaper. I agree with Rebecca that some of these boot camps and degrees can get a little bit iffy. So, but something like Data Camp and Coursera are much cheaper, right? So and they have actual technical skills to teach you. So if this is what you want, there's more people that's needed in the data field and that they exist, right? Because it's a growing field. And therefore, you may meet companies that are very strict in their standards, right? But then there's going to be other employers who need someone and they're willing to put in an investment, right? So that shouldn't stop you from doing this if you feel like you don't have the right background.
Absolutely.
Can you guys hear me? My internet kind of just dropped out a little bit.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, I think her internet went.
Oh.
You're back. Okay.
Am I back?
Yeah.
It keeps going out. I'm so sorry. I hate that happens, but of course it's the world of technology. So sorry, I just lost my track of where. So for those of you who have a manager, have had a manager, what qualities do you look for in your manager to support you in your data science roles or a data specific role? If you honestly, you know, if you can't, if something that maybe you can think about like later on, you can always share in the Q&A.
I think this is a tough one. Like the very best thing, the best case is that your manager is a data scientist who is now a manager because they know what you're going through and they can, they can queue up good projects for you and stuff like that. Likely that's not the case just because data science hasn't been around long enough for there to be very many data science managers. So I would say, somebody who is, game to give you a chance to experiment and kind of spitball about projects and give you, kind of room to reach out, to people outside of your immediate organization for mentorship. Maybe even help you identify mentors who are data scientists, or who are data professionals who can give you more specific guidance and advice.
Yeah, I would say immediately where I went is like, sometimes you don't really get to choose your manager. But in that vetting process, like when you are doing an interview, asking details about the manager, who the manager is, like sometimes in the interview process, you do get to talk with that individual, but you could always maybe ask someone else who can get content for you to understand, do they have they been there? Do they have that background that I think will help support me? Because I agree with Rebecca. I think having some sort of historical experience is super helpful. But once you're in the role and just working with that individual, I think it's being doing your own research to say, here are my ideas of what I think will develop, so that you can get their insight. And if they're not that person that really has that expertise, then ask them for someone else for a recommendation from them. So like, who do you recommend I should talk to have this type of conversation if it's not that individual? So I think it's important not to solely rely on the manager to be your like gate of like progress, and really saying, if it's not this person, that's okay, but let's work together to find me that person that I need to help me make the progress.
A lot of questions are coming in right now. So I'm trying to make sure I can try to get a good variety. Someone asked, what checks and balances are being put in place in context of ethics and respecting the currency referenced? As the currency is valuable human data, and there can be risk of data being exploited. Do you guys have any, I guess, input around that?
Yeah, the governments do tend to lag behind technology, unfortunately. So it does usually takes regulation a little while to catch up. And it's maybe a little bit naive for us to expect that, companies will do good on their own. I don't think any of these companies are trying to do bad, to be honest with you. I don't think that, I know that kind of thinking about monetizing people sounds yucky, but I don't think anybody is trying to do anything evil. But regulation is sort of there to kind of set hard limits. There are a ton of regulations that are coming out. So GDPR is the reason we all see those banners, those cookie banners at the bottom of websites now. So GDPR was the big one that came out a couple of years ago that impacts Europe, but honestly, it impacts everybody. If there's any chance that you'll interact with a person from Europe. And there's new ones that are coming out all the time. There's one that came out in California. There's one that's coming out in Virginia. Like literally, if you ask me this question again in a month, there are going to be a bunch of new ones. So the governments are catching up.
Yeah, I think some of it is really the responsibility of us on everyday actions and aspects of how we show up in the questions that we ask. And as we look around the people and seeing the people we're surrounded with, really trying to make sure that is diverse and that has a wide variety of viewpoints, because I think you can really avoid exploitation or that risk by bringing a wide variety of people to the table and just constantly questioning and being curious about what you're doing and the data you're working with. So I think it's just some of it can get overwhelming or feel like you don't have an impact if you look at it at such a broad policy level. So maybe bringing it into your everyday actions that you can do to foster that type of culture, and that might help. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We are running out of time, or we just kind of did run out of time, but this has been such a wonderful conversation. If you guys, want to go through the Q&A and I know Rebecca, I saw that you answered some of them on your own, but if Anna, Alyssa, if you want to go in and share any of your insight beyond this, obviously feel free. I'm sure it'll be much appreciated. But yeah, I've loved this conversation. I'm so happy we were able to do this. Is there any, last commentary that you guys want to provide? Elizabeth, I know you just joined, so.
Yeah, I was
just going to say, I know that Alyssa does have a hard stop right now, so I wanted to give her the space to say bye real quick. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all for having me, and thank you for the great questions. I feel like these things always get awkward with no questions, and there's so many questions, so I'm really, really excited about this. So thank you for having me.
Yes, and a big thank you again to Breaking the Glass and all of our amazing panelists and our moderator. I'm seeing in the chat that the survey link isn't working for everyone, so I'll coordinate with Elizabeth after, and we'll be able to send that out to anyone still interested. But thank you so much, everyone, for attending. This was a really great event.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thanks. Yeah, we'll send up follow-up information so everyone can continue to ask their questions.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.